Thank you all for coming. I hope you won't regret spending this evening with us. So, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Rostislav Zhuravsky, but you can call me just Rost. So, I've been writing Ruby since 2018. So, I'm really into functional programming and statically typed languages. I truly believe everybody should at least try to use it and write something in it. Yeah, and I like to experiment with different technologies at all. So in my previous company, I used some Go. I had the chance to write a Rails application at early stages from Rails to TypeScript and Node.js. And recently I started learning Rust and some Haskell. So before we start, I'm currently working at a company called Salesloft, where we party hard at night drinking tequila, eat cheesecakes in the morning, and sometimes we work to make the life of salespeople easier. Yeah, visit our website. We recently opened a Polish site, so maybe it's gonna be your next place. A quick poll. So please raise your hand if you've ever worked with a statically typed language before. That's great. And please keep your hand raised if you like that experience. Nice. That's great. So our agenda for today, I'll tell you my Ruby journey, then we will recap some basic concepts related to static typing, then we will see what we have related to static typing in Ruby, and then I'll try to pitch you to use static typing in your current or next project. First of all, I have to confess, I didn't choose Ruby, it's Ruby chose me. In 2015, I went to university to get a computer science degree. And at that time, we were writing C and C++, and I really liked it. I wanted to grow a beard and become a true C++ developer. But after 2 years, so I faced the harsh reality of the software market in Belarus at that time. And the easiest solution for me was to learn something modern. And I watched a couple of videos what language to choose in 2020 to get a job. And asked my friend, and the best solution was Python, actually. After 2 months of learning Python, a good friend of mine told me about a summer programming camp conducted by one of the biggest software companies in Belarus. And when we were submitting our application, they asked us to choose 2 preferable languages. I chose Python, because I had been learning it for a while, and I chose Ruby because my friend knew it. Yeah, and when the camp started, they formed 3 groups. The first group was Java, the second group was .NET for PHP, I don't remember, and the third group was Ruby. And that's how it all started. I remember our lectures, and our mentors were constantly making fun of the Java group. They were telling like, oh, by the time the Java group would finish fighting with the compile errors, guys, you'll finish your project. It felt really great, especially after 2 years with C and C++, all the compile errors and all the segmentation faults. Rails felt like magic. I knew nothing about web development, and I was able to run my first website like in minutes, running a couple of commands, and unfortunately my first job wasn't related with web development and with development at all. I did some web scraping for a while. We used plain Ruby, Nakagiri, and regex, so I'm not afraid of them anymore. And I really liked Ruby. I wanted to become an expert in it because everybody was telling me that Rails existed before because of the metaprogramming capabilities of Ruby, and I wanted to master it and become a cool guy. And after a year of web scraping, I changed my job. And it was a small company where I was the only backend engineer, the only Rails engineer. And my main responsibility was to maintain their website. It was like a design agency with maybe 20 active users a day. And since the load was too low, I was able to do anything I wanted. And I remember I created my own ORM inspired by Active Record, And at the time, I also learned about service object, Trailblazer, and dry transaction, and I felt that it was my obligation to create my own DSL to find those steps. Yeah. After a year in that company, I decided to find a real project in production. It was a 10 years old Rails monolith. At the time, the latest version of Rails was like 6, but in our project it was Rails 4. We used Ruby 2.3. We had almost no test coverage. In the load was like 500 RPM, and for me at the time, it was something. Yeah, and I felt really eager to try and apply all the knowledge that I had. Yeah, and it was me at the beginning. I really liked Ruby, and I didn't really like static typing because I remembered all the words that our mentors had taught us. Yeah, and I thought that static typing in Java was something outdated and not relevant anymore. But after a couple of unsuccessful attempts to refactor an old Rails monolith, so my desire to refactor disappeared. Yeah, and every time I wanted to change something, I had a long thought process like, should I really change it? Will I be a real developer after that if I saw the opportunity and didn't take it? Yeah, and those are the lessons that I learned the hard way. If it's working, don't touch it. So in any case, in Rails application, especially in legacy ones, especially with notation, so it's really hard to understand how exactly your change will affect all parts of your application. There is some metaprogramming like send, like method missing some constant get, and whatever, yeah, you name it. Lesson number 2, metaprogramming feels cool only at the moment when you do it, and only if it's your metaprogramming. So, because it makes you feel smart. Yeah, but if you need to debug it, extend or fix it, that's a nightmare. Yeah, and I think everybody has gone through this learning curve. Like in the beginning when you just started, you don't know metaprogramming and you don't use it and you want to learn it, and once you learn it, you're like, oh, I'm a god of Ruby, I need to use it everywhere. But after a while, you're like, oh, please, some simple functions, if statements, switch cases, and that's it. That's all I need. Yeah, and lesson number 3, the Rails way appears not as cool as it's sold. Yeah, Rails is great if you need to start something from scratch, if you need to build your first MVP, and it's great for delivering new features. But if your application is already on production for some time, and if you need to extend, and if it's your day-to-day job, and it's like, it's really hard to maintain it, because all that magic that happens, I was tired of before action, skip before action, before commit, after commit, before save. I still don't know the difference between them. Yeah, and I was so frustrated that I wanted to change the language. I wanted to find something like really simple and straightforward. Yeah, and I started learning Elixir because it felt to me like a common pattern for Rails developers who were tired of Rails to like switch to Elixir, which was functional, which was simple, and Elixir had everything that I wanted to have in Rails. Yeah, and at that moment I also started watching like conferences to understand how people solve the problems I face. And yeah, I remember that awesome talk by this guy. If you don't know who he is, how dare you? So his name is Nick Sutter. He's creator of Trailblazer. Yeah, and his quote got stuck in my mind. As a developer, I don't want toys. I want tools. And as a community, I feel like we are focused on small little things that look great, but they don't provide any additional functionality. So it's like if you take a look at the latest Ruby releases, so it's like endless methods or like numbered block arguments, but they also introduce fibers, and nobody uses them actually because they are not working. Yeah, and after 2 years of working with the Rails monolith, so my attitude completely changed. I didn't want to touch any Ruby and particularly Rails anymore, and I started thinking about static typing because yeah, I worked on a project where it was Ruby, and we started introducing some static typing. But before we start, let's take up some basic concepts related to static typing. So there are two types of typing. There is static typing and there is dynamic typing. And static typing is simple. Static typing is when you can predict and know the types of your operands, like without running your program actually. It happens like by looking at your source code. And dynamic typing is the completely opposite, so you have no idea what issue you will face until you actually run your application. Yeah, and this is basically software lifecycle, and static checks and static typing is closer to linters and formatters, whereas dynamic typing is closer to like actual runtime. In order to see and get the error, you need to run it somewhere on your dev environment, test, or on production if you feel lucky. Yeah, and another thing that we need to understand that there are interpreted languages and compiled languages. And interpreted languages are really simple. So we have our source code, and to run it, we just like take it and run it without any transformation. But for compiled languages, there should be that step in between that makes something with your source code. However, sometimes people assume that if a language is compiled, it's statically typed by default, and it's not always the case. A compiled language can be dynamically typed, and the opposite is also true. Interpreted languages can be statically typed. And here is a simple map that you can look at, like to understand what languages are where. For example, Ruby is interpreted and dynamically typed, whereas Rust and Go, they are statically typed and compiled. However, Elixir, it's compiled, but it's dynamically typed. So there is some transformation, but in Elixir you can get a runtime error about some type mismatch. Yeah, and we as Ruby developers are mostly interested in the top right corner. If it was only possible to somehow make our Ruby applications typed, and there is a solution for that. Big companies like GitHub, Shopify, Stripe, they were created thanks to the flexible nature of Ruby and Rails, so they were able to grow quickly, they were able to provide new functionality, they earned a lot of money. But the bigger your company is, the higher the cost of a mistake is, and the more developers are working at your code on your code base, the higher chance of making those mistakes. And there is a solution for that. It's called gradual typing, and gradual typing is a solution that basically you take your source code of a dynamically typed language, and when you add those types, it doesn't change the behavior of your runtime. So, like your source code and your types, they live separately, and they somehow help each other. Yeah. Do we have anything related to gradual typing in Ruby? That's that part. In Ruby 3.0, they released a couple of tools, RBS, Typeproof, and Steep, and at the time when they released it, I checked it, and it felt not production ready, it felt raw, and nobody actually started using it. RBS is a language for your type signature. Typeproof is a tool that helps you generate some types looking at your source code, and Steep is actually a type checker. However, there is a better solution, and it's called Sorbet. Sorbet is a type checker that was released 1 year earlier than Ruby 3.0, and it was released by Stripe. Stripe has a huge Ruby code base. They don't use Rails, and it's a huge monolith, and they decided not to split that into microservices deliberately. Yeah, and they truly believe in developer productivity, and they wanted to solve the issue that people working on a huge code base make certain mistakes, like undefined method for new class. Yeah, and after they open sourced it, a lot of companies started using it, and Shopify, they are big users of Sorbet. They even started using it before they open sourced it, like closed beta. And if you try to look for something related to Sorbet, you will see that a lot of talks, a lot of tooling that is available at the moment is made by Shopify engineers. Yeah, and let's see how it works actually and how we can use Sorbet. So this is going to be our example, a simple class of person with two attributes, name and age. We have our initializer, and we have a simple method greeting that returns a greeting for our person. Yeah, and in order to add Sorbet to your project, you need those three gems. Sorbet runtime, which will bring type DSL for type annotations to your Ruby classes, and you need Sorbet, which is the actual static typing, and Tapioca is a set of tools that will make your life working with Sorbet easier. Yeah, we can run Tapioca init, and it will generate a couple of folders. We don't need to configure anything additionally. Like run it, and that's it. It's ready to go. And if we try to run our type checker, we will see no errors, because this is exactly what gradual typing is. So by default, Sorbet ignores all the files unless you specifically tell it, like, please check out those files, verify them. And there are different levels of strictness. So the lowest level is type ignore, and the higher type strong, but on their website they recommend using type strict. Let's add it at the top of our file, and let's run our checks again. And those are the errors. And errors are the best part of Sorbet. They're great. First of all, you see the entire backtrace from the place where the issue happened down to the bottom whenever your method is defined. And our issue says that we missed some meta signatures, and there are also those links. And if you visit, it also suggests you some autocorrection, like to avoid you typing it manually. And if you use those links, so for majority of the errors that you will face, there will be a great explanation how to fix it, what that means, and some links to documentation and some related errors. Yeah, and here's how we add type signatures to our classes. First of all, we need to extend our class with the sig, which will add that sig method. And for each method in your class, Sorbet requires you to add annotations if the level that we use is strict. So for other reader, we return string. For age, we return integer. We have also initialize that accepts two parameters, and we specify those parameters. By the way, all those signatures are valid Ruby syntax, so it's no magic. There is no preprocessor. You just add your signatures and run your programs as you usually do it by Ruby and the name of the file. Yeah, and we added some signatures, and let's add another file that we want to statically check. So, and where we gonna use our person class, and we just initiated an instance with name Rost and age 25, and we will use that greeting method, and everything just works. But let's deliberately introduce some errors. For example, for name, we pass nil, and for age, we will pass a string. Like, for example, if you initialize your object and you take parameters from like query string. Yeah, and if we run our type checks again, we will see Sorbet will have us covered. So it says that on line 6 in the file main RB expected string, but nil was passed. It tells us where exactly the signature is defined, and the third line what nil class originated from. It tells where the broken value comes from, and the same for age. Yeah, That's basically it. This is how we add simple type signatures, and now I will show you a couple of things that I really like about Sorbet. Some basic utilities that will make your life easier. First thing is structs. So if you take a look at our class, we will see that it's a little bit repetitive. Like we have add reader name, and we have to specify the same attribute inside our initializer, and we need to assign the values. To make it easier and shorter, so Sorbet provides structs. So you just inherit your class from tstruct, and you can specify your fields like const tells that its value is written you like pass, and it will generate a reader for you. It will also generate the initializer, and yeah, it can also understand like the types and analyze it, which is pretty short and simple. Yeah, another thing that I really like about Sorbet are enums. Usually when we need to implement some enums in Ruby, we use strings or symbols or their combination, but Sorbet provides a different approach. So imagine that we want to add a gender to our person class, and we need to inherit that class from tenum, and we need to specify all the values of our enums inside that enums method. Yeah, and all those male, female, and binary will be actually children of the class gender. Yeah, let's add it. We just say that here's our gender field and it's type gender, and we just added a new field. But if, for example, forgot to add that field in that file where we initialize our person, and if we run our type checks, so Sorbet will tell us, hey, you forgot to add gender. Yeah, and it tells you also where the gender is defined. And if we add it, for example, and we forgot, like that it's an enum, we just pass string as value, and Sorbet will help us to prevent that issue from going on production. So it says expected gender, but found string male. Yeah, and if we want to use an value, we just need to specify directly gender male, and that will work. Another great thing about enums is their ability to be exhaustive. So, for example, imagine that we want to implement a class called concierge that will be meeting our guests at the door at our conferences, and we want it to be as friendly as possible, and depending on the gender of a person, add some miss or misses, or if it's non-binary, just omit that to avoid confusion. Yeah, and here's how it's done. We have our welcome method that accepts person. We extract gender from it, and for the gender, we just go through all the possible values. And one important thing is that else clause. So the T-absurd tells Sorbet to verify that all the possible values of that enum are actually covered. And we forgot to handle gender male. Yeah, and if we run our type check, we will see that, oh, so we forgot to add it. It tells where it is, and it tells us which values are actually covered. Yeah. One more thing that I will tell you about Sorbet is RBI files. For example, in a typical Ruby project, there is a lot of dependencies. For example, there are gems that we don't control, and if those gems don't have type signatures, we can't use them because Sorbet will complain that I don't know what method you call and what signature it has. And in order to solve that, like this is an example, like we have an external gem and we call execute. And first of all, Sorbet is unable to resolve that constant. Yeah, it provides some suggestions, but yeah. And to solve that, if we look back at the files that the POP generated, initially there is RBI directory, and inside the directory we can provide type signatures for source codes we don't control. For example, if you have some metaprogramming magic and some constants are generated at runtime, you just write signature for them manually, and that's it. It just works. But yeah, I guess you're wondering, but if I want to use Rails, and there is a lot of things to cover that are hidden from me, and Shopify helps us with that. So they created a repo called RBI Central, where they have type signatures for most popular Ruby gems. Yeah, and there is much more helpful tools like interfaces, generics, enable options, union types, final methods. Sorbet is a production-ready tool that we can use and we can rely on, and it's battle tested. Yeah. And what about Rails and its magic? For example, if you have your Rails models and you need to generate type definitions for them, TPOP will help you. It will run your application, takes the related table, gets fields and their types, and generates type signatures based on that information. And that's pretty handy. Yeah. And yeah, you're sitting and thinking about, why do I even bother? Why should I use it? I was happy with Ruby for like 5, maybe 10 years, and I don't even need another tool in my toolset. And when I was discussing static typing with people like 2 or 3 years ago, they were like, oh, adding types is like twice as much work. That's why we choose Ruby, because we want to write our code fast, deliver it fast. But first of all, we have LLMs, and when I was preparing the presentation, I used Copilot, and all the type signatures were generated by it. I was just pressing tab, and that's it. And compilers got smart, actually. So type inference allows you like define as less signatures as possible. Yeah, for example, if you work with TypeScript, TypeScript doesn't require you to annotate your functions, and it will be able to predict the return type and by the actual value that is returned from your function. If you, I want to encourage you to use it like personally. For example, if you, as I am, tired from all the Rails magic and you want something predictable, solid, that you can rely on, there is no need to learn another language anymore. You can just try Sorbet. Yeah, and it gives you a much more pleasant developer experience. I know that modern IDEs like VS Code and RubyMine, they give you a lot of tooling. And for example, if you need to rename some method or some class, it somehow predicts where it's used, but it's like not 100% guarantee. But when your code is actually typed, so there is no magic. You go to definitions in the exact place where it's defined, and if you need to rename something, it will work. And by the way, Sorbet team, they released what is it called? LSP, language server protocol, for specifically for VS Code. I tried it and it worked really great. And it's just fun to try something new. This is what I care more about. It's like if you're a manager of a team leader, or if you're a CTO, so by adopting Sorbet, you will make the life of your developers much easier. First of all, you will have to write less tests, because a lot of tests that Ruby developers write, they're like stupid checks. For example, if a new is passed, or if an empty string is passed. Yeah, there will be less human factor, because people in general, they're great on solving things at the moment and having ideas, but in typical Rails applications, you need to keep a lot of things in mind. It's like, you have a great idea and you're, oh, where is it used? How is it going to affect my application? So, do I have any metaprogramming that is hidden from me? Yeah. And one important thing that I want to highlight is zero-fee rollback. For example, if you decided to try Sorbet, you added your annotations, and after 2 months you decide, like, it's not for us. It takes too much, our developers are not willing to deal with that. You can delete like immediately. You just remove that sorbet directory. You just find your type signatures through regex and delete it, and that's it. And that's basically it. Thank you very much.